Basics with Compose. In this course, you will learn the fundamentals of how to build Android apps.
We're from the Android team at Google, and we'll be your instructors for this course. I'm Dan.
I'm Kat, and we'll be here guiding you throughout your journey.
And I'm Megan. We'll do our best to explain things clearly with step-by-step instructions.
It's hard to imagine life without our phones.
And in this course, you're going to have a chance to learn how to build an app that runs on one of these. It honestly feels like a superpower to know how to build an app, to take something that's an idea in your head and put it on your phone.
And it's not just your phone.
There are over 2.5 billion Android devices in the world.
That's phones, tablets, TVs, watches, and even cars.
Imagine how cool it would be to make an app that your friends can use.
The apps that you use on your phone are often quite complex.
Cars.
Imagine
phones, tablets, TVs, watches, and even cars.
Imagine how cool it would be to
TVs, watches, and even cars.
Imagine how cool it would be to make an app that your friends can use.
The apps that you use on your phone are often quite complex. They have whole companies and teams of engineers working on them. And all those engineers had to start at the beginning.
So in this course, we're going to focus on building a series of basic Android apps that can run on a phone.
The course is split up into units. Each unit is made up of several pathways. Pathways are composed of videos, code labs, and each unit is made up of
A phone.
The course is split up into units. Each unit is made up of several pathways. Pathways are composed of videos, code labs, and quizzes. And, drumroll please, you will earn badges along the way.
You'll also be building up your developer profile, which you can use to show the skills you've gained throughout this course.
By learning the fundamentals of programming and the core concepts in Android, you will have a solid foundation to build off of.
You'll learn how to use Android Studio, the tool we use to write our code.
And you'll be learning Kotlin, the recommended programming language for developing Android apps. At its core, a programming language is used to tell a computer what you want it to do. It's similar to learning a foreign language, but at its core, a programming language for developing Android apps. At its core, a programming language is used to tell a computer
We use to write our code.
And you'll be learning Kotlin, the recommended programming language for developing Android apps. At its core, a programming language is used to tell a computer what you want it to do. It's similar to learning a foreign language, but instead of speaking to people from another country, we're communicating with the computer.
We'll get into more details of learning Kotlin later.
Country wanted to do. It's similar to learning a foreign language, but instead of speaking to people from another country, we're communicating with the computer.
We'll get into more details of learning Kotlin later, but first let's talk about what you need to start this course.
To get started, you need a computer and an internet connection so you can download Android Studio. You don't need any prior programming experience, but we do require that you have basic computer and math skills. Knowing basic math is useful when you're programming because of the problem-solving skills involved.
It's also helpful to have an Android device, phone or tablet, to test your app on. If you don't have one, that's okay. We'll show you how to simulate an Android device on your computer with something called an emulator. It's also great to be familiar with using Android apps. If you haven't used Android before, you'll learn this along the way.
Above all, the most important requirement is your motivation and willingness to learn. It's going to be a challenging but rewarding process if you stick with it.
You may be asking, can I get a job as an Android developer after this course? Well, the answer is not quite. We're going to prepare you with the basics, and there are more advanced classes you can take and more practice you should do on your own to pursue the career path of a developer.
Now, you might be asking, how long will the course take? That really depends on how much you already know and how much time you can invest in learning the material. Anywhere from a few weeks to a few months is realistic.
No matter where you come from, this journey will be challenging, interesting, and we hope also fun.
By the end, you will have built a collection of apps that will show you a glimpse of what's possible with Android.
We are super excited!
Super excited!
We're super excited that you've decided to join us, and we welcome you to this course.
Welcome!
Define versus call a function. In your code, you define a function first. That means you specify all the instructions needed to perform that task. Once the function is defined, then you can call that function, so the instructions within that function can be performed or executed. Here's an analogy. You write out step-by-step instructions on how to bake a chocolate cake. This set of instructions can have a name, Bake Chocolate Cake. Every time you want to bake a cake, you can execute the Bake Chocolate Cake instructions. If you want 3 cakes, you need to execute the Bake Chocolate Cake instructions 3 times. The first step is defining the steps and giving it a name, which is considered defining the function. Then you can refer to the steps anytime you want them to be executed, which is considered calling the function. Define a function. These are the key parts needed to define. Note, you may hear the alternate phrase, declare a function. The words declare and define can be used interchangeably and have the same meaning. You may also hear the term, function definition, or function declaration, which refer to the exact code that defines a function. In some other programming languages, declare and define have different meanings. Define a function. These are the key parts needed to define a function. The function needs a name, so you can call it later. The function can also require some inputs or information that needs to be provided when the function is called. The function uses these inputs to accomplish its purpose. Requiring inputs is optional, and some functions do not require inputs. The function also has a body which contains the instructions to perform the task. To translate the above diagram into Kotlin code, use the following syntax, or format, for defining a function. The order of these elements matters. The fun word must come first, followed by the function name, followed by the inputs in parentheses, followed by curly braces around the function body. Notice the key parts of a function within the main function example you saw in the Kotlin playground. The function definition starts with the word fun. Then the name of the function is main. There are no inputs to the function, so the parentheses are empty. There is one line of code in the function body, println, hello, world, which is located between the opening and closing curly braces of the function. Each part of the function is explained in more detail below. Function keyword. To indicate that you're about to define a function in Kotlin, use the special word fun, short for function. Function, on a new line. You must type fun exactly. Function name. To indicate that you're about to define a function in Kotlin, use the special word fun, short for function, on a new line. You must type fun exactly as shown in all lowercase letters. You can't use func, function, or some alternative spelling because the Kotlin compiler won't recognize what you mean. These special words are called keywords in Kotlin and are reserved for a specific purpose, such as creating a new function in Kotlin. Function name. Functions have names so they can be distinguished from each other, similar to how people have names to identify themselves. The name of the function is found after the fun keyword. Choose an appropriate name for your function based on the purpose of the function. The name is usually a verb or verb phrase. It's recommended to avoid using a Kotlin keyword as a function name. Function names should follow the camel case convention, where the first word of the function name is all lowercase. If there are multiple words in the name, there are no spaces between words, and all other words should begin with a capital letter. Example function names: calculate tip, display error message, take photo. Function inputs. Notice that the function name is always followed by parentheses. These parentheses are where you list inputs for the function. An input is a piece of data that a function needs to perform its purpose. When you define a function, you can require that certain inputs be passed in when the function is called. If there are no inputs required for a function, the parentheses are empty. Here are some examples of functions with a different number of inputs. The following diagram shows a function that is called add1. The purpose of the function is to add 1 to a given number. There is one input, which is the given number. Inside the function body, there is code that adds 1 to the number passed into the function. In this next example, there is a function called print fullname. There are two inputs required for the function, one for the first name and one for the last name. The function body prints out the first name and last name in the output to display the person's full name. This last example shows a function that doesn't require any inputs to be passed in when the function is called. When you call the display hello function, a hello message gets printed to the output. Function body. The function body contains the instructions needed to achieve the purpose of the function. You can locate the function body by looking for the lines of code enclosed within the opening and closing curly braces. Simple program explained. Look back at the simple program that you saw earlier in the code lab. The program contains one function, the main function. Main is a special function name in Kotlin. When you're writing your code in the Kotlin playground, your code should be written inside the main function or called from the main function. There's only one line of code in the body of this main function. Print hello world. This line of code is a statement because it performs a specific action, which is to print the hello world text in the output pane. More specifically, the println function is being called on this line of code. Println is a function that's already defined in the Kotlin language. That means the team of engineers who created the Kotlin language already wrote out the function declaration for the println function. The function requires one input, which is the message that should be printed. When you call the println function, place the message text within parentheses after the function name. Be sure to use quotation marks around the text to display, such as, hello, world. When the program is executed, the message that was passed into the println function is printed to the output. Hello, world. Try it. Now look back at the original code in the program. Can you modify the code in the Kotlin playground so that the output shows this message instead? Hello, Android. Back. Next. Bug_report. Back. Next. Bug_report report a mistake. Modify your program. In order to change the message that's displayed in the output, modify the println function call on the second line of the program. Replace world with Android in the println function. Make sure that hello, Android is still within quotation marks and within the parentheses. Fun main, println, hello, Android. Run the program. The output should show this message. Hello, Android. Nice job, you modified your first program. Now can you change your code so that the message gets printed twice? See the desired output. Hello, Android. Hello, Android. Print more than one message. You can put as many lines of instructions inside a function as you need to accomplish a task. However, note that there should only be one statement per line in Kotlin. If you want to write another statement, put it on a new line of the function. To change your program to print multiple lines of text, copy the initial println statement and paste the second statement below it within the function body. Both println statements must be contained within the curly braces of the main function. Now you have two statements within the function body. Fun main, println, hello, Android. Println, hello, Android. Run the program. When you run your program, the output should be hello, Android. Hello, Android. You can see how changes to the code affects the output. Change the Change the code so that it says hello, your underscore name. 7. Kotlin Style Guide. Throughout this course, you'll learn about good coding practices to follow as an Android developer. One such practice is to follow Google's Android coding standards for code written in Kotlin. The complete guide is called a style guide and explains how code should be formatted in terms of visual appearance and the conventions to follow when writing your code. For example, the style guide includes recommendations on use of whitespace, indentation, naming, and more. The purpose of following the style guide is to make your code easier to read and more consistent with how other Android developers write their code. This consistency is important when collaborating on large projects together, so that the style of code is the same throughout all the files in the project. Here are some of the relevant style guide recommendations for what you've learned in Kotlin so far. Function names should be in camel case and should be verbs or verb phrases. Each statement should be on its own line. The opening curly brace should appear at the end of the line where the function begins. There should be a space before the opening curly brace. Brace. The function body should be indented in by 4 spaces. Do not use a tab character to indent your code, type in 4 spaces. The closing curly brace is on its own line after the last line of code in the function. Function body. The closing brace should line up with the fun keyword at the beginning of the function. Beginning of the function. You will learn more Android coding conventions as you build your knowledge in Kotlin. 8. Fix errors in your code. When you learn a human language, there are rules of syntax and grammar for the correct way to use words and form sentences. Similarly, for programming languages, there are specific rules for what makes valid code, which means code that compiles successfully. A normal part of the coding process involves making mistakes and accidentally writing invalid code. As a beginner, it may be confusing or overwhelming to encounter these mistakes. But don't worry, this is expected. Code rarely works perfectly the first time that it's written. Just like how writing a document takes many drafts, writing code can take many iterations until it works as expected. If the code can't compile successfully, there's an error. For example, if you have a typo, such as a missing quotation mark or parenthesis, the compiler won't understand your code and can't translate it into steps for the computer to perform. If your code doesn't work as expected, or you see an error message in your code editor, you have to go back to your code and fix it. The process of solving these errors is called troubleshooting. Copy and paste the following code snippet into the Kotlin playground and run the program. What do you see? Fun main, print. Println, today is sunny. Sunny. Ideally, you want to see the message today is sunny displayed. Instead, in the output pane, you see exclamation point icons with error messages. Error message from Kotlin Playground. The error messages start with the word expecting because the Kotlin compiler is expecting something but not finding it in the code. In this case, the compiler is expecting a closing quotation mark and a closing parenthesis for the code on the second line of your program. In the println statement, notice that the message to display has an opening quotation mark, but no closing quotation mark. Even though there is a closing parenthesis in the code, the compiler thinks the parenthesis is part of the text to print because there is no closing quotation mark before it. Add the closing quotation mark after the exclamation point, before the closing parenthesis. Fun main, println, today is sunny. The main function contains one line of code, which is a println statement, where the text is enclosed in quotation marks and placed within the parentheses. Today is sunny. Run the program again. There shouldn't be any errors and the output pane should display this text. Today is sunny. Good work on fixing the error. Once you gain more experience in writing code and troubleshooting errors, you'll realize how important it is to pay attention to capitalization, spelling, spacing, symbols, and names when you're typing your code. In the next section, you work on a series of exercises to practice what you've learned. Solutions are provided at the end of the code lab, but try your best to find the answer on your own first. Back. Next. text. Bug_report report a mistake. Except as otherwise noted, the content of this page is licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license. Yuzhen. Great job on completing this introduction to Kotlin. You worked with simple programs in Kotlin and ran them to see text printed to the output. You modified the programs in different ways and observed how those changes affected the output. It's normal to make mistakes when programming, so you also began to learn about how to troubleshoot and correct errors in your code, which is an important skill that will help you in the future. Move on to the next code lab to learn how to use variables in Kotlin so that you can create more interesting programs. Summary. A Kotlin program requires a main function as the entry point of the program. To define a function in Kotlin, use the fun keyword, followed by the name of the function, any inputs enclosed in parentheses, followed by the function body enclosed in curly braces. The name of a function should follow camel case convention and start with a lowercase letter. Use the println function call to print some text to the output. Refer to the Kotlin style guide for formatting and code conventions to follow when coding in Kotlin. Troubleshooting is the process of resolving errors in your code. Learn more. Hello world. Program entry point. Print to the standard output. Basic syntax of function. Define versus use a variable. You must define a variable first in your code before you can use the variable. This is similar to what you learned in the last code lab about defining functions before calling them. When you define a variable, you assign a name to uniquely identify it. You also decide what type of data it can hold by specifying the data type. Lastly, you can provide an initial value that will be stored in the variable, but this is optional. Note, you may hear the alternate phrase, declare a variable. The words declare and define can be used interchangeably and have the same meaning. You may also hear the term variable definition or variable declaration, which refer to the code that defines a variable. In other languages, declare and define have different meanings. Once you define a variable, you can use that variable in your program. To use a variable, type out the variable name in your code, which tells the Kotlin compiler that you want to use the variable's value at that point in the code. For example, define a variable for the number of unread messages in a user's inbox. The variable can have the name count. Store a value such as the number 2 inside the variable, representing 2 unread messages in the user's inbox. You can pick a different number to store in the variable, but for the purpose of this example, use the number 2. Every time your code needs to access the number of unread messages, type count in your code. When executing your instructions, the Kotlin compiler sees the variable name in your code and uses the variable value in its place. Technically, there are more specific vocabulary words to describe this process. An expression is a small unit of code that evaluates to a value. An expression can be made up of variables, function calls, and more. In the following case, the expression is made up of one variable, the count variable. This expression evaluates to 2. Evaluate means determining the value of an expression. In this case, the expression evaluates to 2. The compiler evaluates expressions in the code and uses those values when executing the instructions in the program. To observe this behavior in the Kotlin playground, run the program in the next section. Example. Open the Kotlin playground in a web browser. Replace the existing code in the Kotlin playground with the following program. This program creates a variable called count with an initial value of 2 and uses it by printing out the value of the count variable to the output. Don't worry if you don't understand all aspects of the code syntax yet. It will be explained in more detail in upcoming sections. Fun main, val count, int equals 2 println, count. Run the program and the output should be 2. Variable declaration. In the program you ran, the second line of code says val count, int equals 2. This statement creates an integer variable called count that holds the number 2. It can take a while to become familiar with reading the syntax, or format, for declaring a variable in Kotlin. The following diagram shows where each detail about the variable should be located, as well as the location of spaces and symbols. In the context of the count variable example, you can see that the variable declaration starts with the word val. The name of the variable is count. The data type is int, and the initial value is 2. Each part of the variable declaration is explained in more detail below. Keyword to define new variable. To define a new variable, start with the Kotlin keyword val, which stands for value. Then the Kotlin compiler knows that a variable declaration is in this statement. Variable name. Just like you name a function, you also name a variable. In the variable declaration, the variable name follows the val keyword. You can choose any variable name you want, but as a best practice, avoid using Kotlin keywords as a variable name. It's best to choose a name that describes the data that the variable holds so that your code is easier to read. Variable names should follow the camel case convention, as you learned with function names. The first word of the variable name is all lowercase. If there are multiple words in the name, there are no spaces between words, and all other words should begin with a capital letter. Example variable names. Number of emails. City name. Book publication date. For the code example shown earlier, count is the name of the variable. Val count, int equals 2. Variable data type. After the variable name, you add a colon, a space, and then the data type of the variable. As mentioned earlier, string, int, double, float, and boolean are some of the basic Kotlin data types. You'll learn more data types later in this course. Remember to spell data types exactly as shown and begin each with a capital letter. For the count variable example, int is the data type of the variable. Val count, int equals 2. Assignment operator. In the variable declaration, the equal sign symbol, equal sign, follows the data type. The equal sign symbol is called the assignment operator. The assignment operator assigns a value to the variable. In other words, the value on the right-hand side of the equal sign gets stored in the variable on the left-hand side of the equal sign. Variable initial value. The variable value is the actual data that's stored in the variable. For the count variable example, the number 2 is the initial value of the variable. Val count, int equals 2. You may also hear the phrase, the count variable is initialized to 2. This means that 2 is the first value stored in the variable when the variable is declared. The initial value will be different depending on the data type declared for the variable. Refer to the following table, which you may recognize from earlier in the code lab. The third column shows example values that can be stored in a variable of each corresponding type. These values are called literals because they are fixed or constant values. The value is constantly the same. As an example, the integer 32 is always going to have the value of 32. In contrast, a variable is not a literal because its value can change. You may hear these literal values referred to based on their type, string literal, integer literal, boolean literal, etc. Kotlin data type. What kind of data it can contain? Example literal values. String. Text. Add contact, search, sign in. Int. Integer number. 32129340 minus 59,281. Double. Decimal number. 2.0501.0292 minus 31,723.99999. Float. Decimal number, that is less precise than a double. Has an F or F at the end of the number. 5. Inference. In line 3,